Will
This
be
meeting is
recorded.
being recorded.
And there we go. Case in point, it's going to be recorded and you'll have access to it for 3 months. In this session, as with all sessions, we ask that you use the Whova features to the right of your screen. And if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. Otherwise, we might lose your questions within the chat. And then all participants are muted and cannot unmute unless the hosts give you permission. You have the option to use live transcription is available if you want or need that live audio captioning and access to the full transcript. There's also a take notes feature within Whova, so if you are interested in that, you can use that within this session, and those are just for you, only you can see them. When the session is over, we do ask that you complete the evaluation. We have already put that link in the chat. I'll put the link in the chat there at the end, and if you are applying for CEs, you will need to complete your evaluations. Other than that, I will toss it off to our presenters.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Depending on where you are, it's like mid-morning for me here. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My name is Mira Seshadri, and I'm one of the co-presenters for this session. I'll be talking a little bit more about myself in just a few moments, but I wanted to also have my co-presenter introduce themselves.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Mara. Hi, my name is Jen Jacobson. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in snowy and cold St. Paul, Minnesota, where it is 10:16 in the morning. And thank you so much. This is such a great conference. There's so many great sessions at each hour. So we are so delighted that you chose to spend the next 75 minutes with us.
Yeah, definitely. And as Jen and I were creating this, it took a lot of twists and turns. And I've been attending some sessions throughout the last couple of days and definitely have a lot to think about, even as I was considering what we would be talking about today. So, this is called Embodiment, Research to Practice, Building and Sustaining the Prevention Movement. And so we hope we'll have a really engaging time today with all of you and looking forward. Okay, so who am I? My name is Mira Seshadri. As I said, I am the Health Communications and Prevention Strategist for Soteria Solutions. And in that role, I create workplace and higher ed curriculum that really focuses on health equity and identity, power, and safety, and how that impacts our experiences of harm. But I also have a second career as a professional choreographer and a dancer. I've been dancing since I was 4 years old. We recently competed in World of Dance 3 weeks ago and placed third at the New England-based competition. So dance is a huge part of my life, and a big part of dance for me is community and community building. So when we think about embodiment, for me, it's really been a gift given what the last 10 years of our lives have looked like worldwide, with pandemics and loss and grief, and the advent of AI and technologies that I couldn't even have dreamt of when I was still sneaking into the den and hoping the dial-up sound wouldn't reach my parents' bedroom and like stuffing pillows on top of it so I could send an email from our family email. So it's not like it couldn't be traced, but a huge part of embodiment for me with dance and my life is presence. So when I'm dancing, when I'm with my community, I can't look at my phone. I'm not taking reels. I'm not an influencer. So I'm just really in the moment, in the mess and the connection and the beauty of it. And so that's a big part of where I'm coming to today's presentation from, this idea of being fully embodied in my work and in myself. I will hand it over to Jen.
All right. My name is Jen Jacobson. Again, she, hers. I have both a master's in sports psychology and a master's in public health. And where Mira and I came together, this is our first time collaborating for a conference, is we both have experiences of embodiment in different spheres. So I was a high school student athlete in track and field and cross country. I ran in college at a Division III school, and I spent the first half of my career as a Division III men's and women's college coach. In my mid-career MPH, I did my field experience at the NCAA, thinking about how we work through topics such as substance use, mental health, but also bystander work, sexual respect with student athletes as an audience. I've been the executive director here at Macalester College of our Health and Wellness Center for about 4 years. It's another D3 institution, and I co-lead our student athlete mentor program. If you think about a lightly trained RA for each athletic team, and I'm in the pool of folks who do active bystander training on campus, and our varsity athletes are the one group on campus who have a requirement to do that. And what made me think a lot about it, about embodiment, is the way we can lean into embodiment when we do training with student athletes, because when we work with them team by team, they are used to being embodied with each other. But also, as Mira said about the presence, when you are at practice, you don't have your phone and you are present with what you are doing and what you are doing in community. I think a lot of us have experienced with the disruption of the pandemic with a lot of students is for some of them at really formative times, instead of being in community, right? They were home based, they weren't seeing their friends, they were doing classes online and that. And we've seen it, and Miriam will talk a little bit more about some ways that maybe it has disrupted folks' ability to communicate and navigate conflict. And the one site of people who've had to continue to do this that I work with is student athletes, where we continue to come together in person and talk about hard things. So we'll talk a little later about how do we take some of those protective factors of student athletes and broaden that out with different groups we work with.
Great. So I hope that we are all feeling as present as possible in this virtual space. And if I was looking down, it's because I'm trying to have the chat up on my phone while also engaging with you all and sharing my slides. So forgive me if my eyes are slightly roving. Okay, so it's hard to have group agreements in a virtual space, but I still think it's really important as you're thinking through how you'll engage with the material today, both for yourself and for others. Respecting your own and others' boundaries, not sharing a story that is not your own, recognizing that your value is not determined by your contribution. That's a big one that I'm still working on in our society today. Acknowledging your biases and isms as and when they show up. And then just checking in with yourself. A lot of the topics that we'll talk about throughout this conference have been, some have been very difficult. And of course, we would give a content warning that we will be talking about the way trauma sits in the body and how that interacts with this idea of engagement and embodiment and community. And these are hard topics for people. And so just check in with yourself and feel free to let us know in the comments if there are any questions at any point. So here are some of our learning outcomes. I'm not huge on that word, but this is sort of where we're going today. We really want to talk about how the interplay of identity, power, and safety is what embodiment really looks and feels like for all of us as humans. So, we have our sense of identity, we have our sense of power, and we have our sense of safety. And those three elements kind of create this sense of embodiment. We'll also move on to talk about the relationship between embodiment, conflict, and what that means for pro-social bystander intervention, and how, they have been kind of thought of in silos when they really need to be thought of as integrated. And then Jen will take us sort of through a case study of her experience working with athletes and how it's a real process to maintain fidelity to an evidence-based program while also adapting to what that unique community need is and what their strengths are, which may not be something self-evident in the program. And then we'll talk about moving forward, since the theme of this conference is maintaining the movement, and what embodiment in community looks like for young people. So if we can all kind of agree that that's what we're doing, we will move forward. Okay, first activity, woohoo! All right, so hopefully you have something to take notes on. That can be your notes app on your phone. But if you have a notebook or some pen and paper, we'd love for you to write down, and feel free to share in the chat as well, 1 or 2 identities that feel most salient and expressive of who you are in the world. So by world, I mean walking to the grocery store, on the train, at the train platform, out with friends on Friday, at the dinner table with your family. What are the identities, labels, roles that feel most salient and expressive of who you are in the world? Just to give sort of the kickstart, I would say that I am a brown woman in every space that I'm in. I'm a woman of color. That's not something that I can really change, whether I claim it or it's assigned to me. That is me in every space that I show up in.
And I am a cis straight white woman in Minnesota. I'm not originally from Minnesota, but especially with a last name like Jacobson, I blended. But I will say, an identity that has become increasingly salient to me is my Gen X-ness. Because even when Mira said you could take notes on the Notes app on your phone, I was like, oh my God, I would never do that. I only do handwritten notes because that's the only way I think. Great participation in the chat. We see people thinking about nationality and genders. And certainly when I think about things that are happening in our communities in Minnesota, my American citizenness is coming to the front for me too, in terms of how I can navigate our cities. Black woman, queer femme, identities for world, my gender and race, African American woman, trans musician, cis white passing woman, identities for this work, trauma survivor in my queerness.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say that the next step is sort of to think of 1 or 2 identities that feel most salient or expressive of who you are in the campus anti-violence movement. And that could have been maybe where you started even, and you went back to the world identity, given where we are today, what our environment is. And I would say that in this work, I come across very sort of obviously as a public health person. I'm always the person, even in my dance studios, where I'm like, you're feeling sick, wear a mask, please. Like, I have no problem saying that to anybody. Whereas, that identity doesn't come out as much in certain spaces. And I'm definitely an artist. And I would say I'm an artist, not just in my dance world, but even in my public health work, is that it's really important to me to think of how we can more creatively engage with these issues. And I'm seeing a lot of, I'm trying to follow the chat on my phone, that there's a lot of talk about, different identities for this work. One of the things that we really wanted to ask you is, given all the identities you've shared, or the ones that might be in your mind that you haven't shared, do you feel safe showing up with these identities in your community spaces? And community spaces, sometimes, even for the best of us, we still think about the communities that we call the closest. But if you think about it, we're in a community space right now. It's a virtual one, and we may not be physically present with each other, but it's still a community. So when I ask, do you feel safe showing up with these identities in your community spaces, I don't just ask about the communities in which you feel the most held. I ask about the community spaces that you are constantly in, with or without sort of consciously being there. So you're in a community space in your anti-violence organization. You're in a community space when you're in the grocery store with people you see a lot. You're in a community space when you're in a meeting with a new client or a new partner. So these are all spaces in which we are navigating our identities and our safety constantly. And so that's just a question I wanted to put up out
And
there.
Mira, in the chat, we're seeing a lot of not always, not really.
Great. And that's it's a great observation, even just to like have that visceral, like, nope, and just kind of sit with that. And then I hope that we can sort of pick apart why that is as we move forward in this presentation. But feel free to keep those identities close and sort of that response close to you.
And we have for the most part, yes, but there are always parts of me I don't show in most communities. We have a yes, I feel safe in my community spaces with all the identities I hold. So we're seeing really a range.
Great. Yeah, and that's totally understandable. There are also people who might not be saying that they have tried to show up with these identities and have repeatedly faced either dismissal or a lack of acceptance or just a weird vibe. And so they don't feel as comfortable showing up and being open in more spaces.
Yeah, we have a great comment here about having an activist mindset in higher education can be very difficult. I feel that way
Yes,
sometimes
Amanda.
about
Kindred
having a public
spirit.
health mindset, which is thinking about all levels at the ecological model and working upstream. And sometimes in higher ed, people are
Yeah.
not prepared or have the capacity to work upstream as much as we would like to in a prevention space.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, are you from the School of Public Health?" I'm like, "Yes, the Life School of Public Health, but public health is everywhere." Anyway, I'm still on my soapbox, but for a different brand. So I will move forward, but these are all great comments. Thank you, Jen, for keeping note of the chat. So we're going to sort of shift into this idea of embodiment. And if you look at it, just its definition in the dictionary, it's a tangible or visible form of an idea, quality, or feeling. But when we did a little bit more research and I looked at the Trauma Research Foundation, they think of or they conceptualize embodiment from a trauma lens as when you are embodied, you are staying present, you have a strong mind body connection, you have a self assuredness or a self awareness. Your movement and your actions are integrated. So you're moving with intention. There's not this feeling of being numb or this sort of mindlessness that happens, or like an automated feeling to your actions. And your response to the world is filled with conviction. It doesn't mean that your response to the world is like kind and supportive, and that's if there's no judgment call on your response to the world. It's just that your response to the world is highly present and backed by this strong feeling of conviction. And so when we think about being embodied, it is in a deep contrast to this idea of being disembodied, and the way trauma kind of makes the experience of trauma disassociates you from yourself, which is this creates this sense of emotional numbness. So when we think about it as from a definition, it's the state or process of being freed from the body or from the physical form. And if you think about the definition, there's no judgment in that either. It's just this is the state of being. But the way trauma can affect you in terms of embodiment is it really dysregulates your nervous system. Your body becomes a source of fear or distress. So it's almost like you and your body are at odds with each other. And then your response to the world lacks a sense of connection, intention, and agency because you have disassociated yourself from this feeling of being fully present. And as humans, we are highly intelligent, brilliant at showing up in a space where we appear present, but we are not actually present at all. And there's been a lot of research lately about how multitasking is actually terrible for the human mind and for long-term learning and memory, because we're not set up to be that way. And when you're multitasking, you're not fully present in any one space. And we're all, guilty of this to some degree with the Netflix on and the phone in our hand and the laptop open and the stove. There are all those things that have happened. However, I think it's not just for spiritual or faith-based people that this idea of mindfulness is important. It literally regulates your everyday. I'm just going to pause here, Jen, to see if there's anything in the comments.
No, we have a lot of enthusiasm for gender and women's studies background.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, good. So I'm going to tell you a little story of a time that I felt truly embodied. And while I'm telling this story, I also ask or encourage you to be thinking of your own story. It's not a very long one, and I'm not going to tell a story related to, sexual or relationship violence. I'm going to tell a story of a time I felt truly embodied was on stage. I just finished our season 16 show 2 weeks ago. And I feel truly alive when I'm on stage. And I think one of the things about being a dancer is that there's this incredible quote by Merce Cunningham where he says, dance gives you nothing back. There are no paintings to hang on the wall. There are no scripts. It's just these fleeting moments when you feel alive. And that's what I feel like on stage. I can feel everything. It's a full sensory experience. I can feel the makeup on my face. I can feel the lights on my face. I can feel the stage under my feet. I can feel the body of the person dancing next to me. I can see people watching me, and I can feel the movements coming from my insides radiating out. I can feel the song in my mind and coming through my eyes and my expressions. And I can feel myself telling the story. It's very strange to feel so in your body and out of your body at the same time, but in a good way. Like I can watch myself do it. I know what story I'm telling the audience, and I hope that they're engaging with me. I feel like I'm drawing them in. And even though it's this community feeling, I know exactly when to go to my formation. I know exactly what second someone is going to come to my left and to my right, and when I have to sit and when I have to stand. I feel like it's only me in that space for a second. Everything blurs out, and it's this feeling of, I'm really doing this. And it's funny because it happens so fast. And then you get off stage and you're like, wait, I want to do it again. Because I think the body craves that feeling of being so fully present. It's the only thing humans have that shows them that you were really in that moment. That really happened. And so that's my sort of a story of when I felt so embodied that I was like, that was me. That happened to me. That's me up there. So even watching myself on video later, I'm like, well, I thought that looked different. But it's like, it's that feeling of like, oh yeah, I'm doing this. Are you seeing me? Are you connecting with me? Are you here? And there's nothing like eye contact with your other dancers on stage, because you're both like, we're in this moment, it's happening. And so yeah, you can even feel my energy change right now because it's got such a positive association for me. And that's my story. So I will wait to see if there's anything that anyone said, and then or I will move on to Jen.
And Barbara has shared that they feel truly embodied when they let their mind wander and allow themselves to daydream.
Yes, very important.
I'm going to share a time of disembodiment, and I'm going to give the same disclaimer Mira did. I'm actually not going to talk about a trauma experience because we're here in this virtual environment. We've just met each other. It's not going to be something related to sexual misconduct. But it is gonna bring us around to the idea of bystander intervention. And maybe this is a story a lot of folks can relate to. Is I was headed to a conference in Denver. My plane was late, and getting into the Denver airport, and I was unfamiliar with the public transportation to get into the city from the airport. If you've ever been there, the airport is quite a distance out. So I've been flying, so I've been sitting and cramped and physically uncomfortable. I am hungry. I am thirsty. I am stressed about getting to where I need to go in a way that was unfamiliar. So not at all feeling embodied or my best self. And getting onto the public transportation, and right, and like every public transportation in every city has their own norms. I don't know what the norms are. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to like wrestle my bags. And there's a guy on the train who says, "Hey, who wants to stand up because, like there's a pregnant woman here. Like who wants to stand up?" And I'm like, "What is he talking about?" Right? Um, and I realized that there's like a heavily pregnant woman on the train. This guy is already standing, so he doesn't have a seat to give up, but he's looking around and sort of making an invitation. Will anyone make room so this woman has an option to sit down? And what made me think about this is when Mira and I were talking, and Mira was helping give me language about being embodied. Because I was like, oh, what a miss for me as someone who's literally going to a conference to talk about bystander intervention, that clearly this was a situation that needed a bystander. But because I was not present, because I was not self-aware, I was unprepared to respond to the world. And so my connection with even seeing what was happening, right? If we think about steps of active bystander, noticing an event, interpreting it as a possible problem, I couldn't do any of those things because in that moment, just because of travel inconveniences, I felt disembodied. And so that affected my ability, my presence, my self-awareness, my response to the world. And so like that's a low level. So we can think about the students we're working with, we can think about ourselves when we are facilitating or we are in a space that requires our response. If that is something that touches on something bigger than travel inconvenience, the way it really gives us a lot to wrestle with as we think about ourselves. As activists, as professionals, as humans who are responding to a situation.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Jen. And I would love to direct everyone who's attending this session, if you have thought of an example where you felt very disembodied and disconnected from your sense of self and your surroundings, there's a poll that we've put up. And the question is, what returned you to yourself? So what was it that returned you to yourself in those moments where you realized, first of all, that's a big thing, to realize that you're feeling disembodied, you're feeling disconnected. And regardless of what your experience is and the subject matter of your experience, what was it that returned you to yourself? And so we have a poll in the session, and we would love for you all to fill that out if you feel comfortable. And we will give you just a few moments to do that. And Jen, while they're filling that out, I'm not sure if that's what it was, because you're already a self-aware person plugged into this field. But do you think what returned you to yourself was this person being like, hello?
Yeah.
There's just
So
someone in the community of
yeah,
the
so
car being a car of the trained car being like, come on,
yes.
guys, wake up, you know?
It was him being so direct, right? Of identifying it. And it was always a reminder. I think about when we do active bystander work, we always say it's really hard to be the first person. So if you're not the first person, can you be the second person? Can you affirm that that person is addressing something that needs support? And it really helped make me be aware to be that second person. So that did kind of re-ground me.
Great. We have a few responses, and I'll view the results now. We have 25 answers. Many of you said me time. A lot of you said a faith-based or spiritual mindfulness practice. Some of you said a community that I'm a part of. A counselor or therapy, and some people said a close friend. I'm going to keep that poll up just in case, things come up for people and I can share the results later. But that
Mira, we have a couple comments in the chat related to the poll.
Oh, okay, great.
So we had someone say, family isn't in the poll, but my children definitely snap me back to being present in the moment.
Great.
Yes, definitely, right? Because like having to be there and respond. Psychoeducation has helped me a lot too to zoom out on the distress dissociation and tell a different story about that.
That's
So I
really
thought that,
interesting.
yeah, that sounds like post-traumatic growth to me.
Yes, definitely. I think I don't know if it's Kaya or Kia has asked, how do we access the poll? It doesn't say poll added. It should be, I think, in those 4 tabs that you have open in the Whova session. It should say like Q&A, poll, chat, and community. So the poll should be there. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so we did do this debrief a little bit in the poll and through the comments, but if anything comes up for people, I definitely want you to share. I have these 2 quotes up here, and they are not from me, and I definitely always want to give credit to the people who have these who are thought leaders in this space. This is they go by Care, and their handle is Erotics of Liberation. You can find them on Instagram. They also have a Substack. And this is from their upcoming book, Abolition is Relational. And I just loved these quotes that they had about trauma. And the first one is, trauma happens when we do not have access to our core needs, safety, dignity, and belonging. Those needs are not individual. They are woven into the fabric of our relationships. They are not just personal states, they are relational universes. And I loved this way of thinking about it. I think in our incredibly individualistic society, it is very difficult for our first instinct to be, I need help. And that too, I need help from my community. I need help from the people who see me for all the things that I hope they see me for. A leader, an educator, a parent, and not just a leader, educator, and a parent, a fabulous leader, and educator, and parent. It's hard for us to take on a role that is less than when we need help. And they go on to say, because trauma is born in the severed space between us, healing must also rise from this space through connection, through relationship, through the restoration of what was lost. And I just fell in love with this idea of thinking about trauma, embodiment, disembodiment, and community, and how we try so hard to rely on ourselves when there are so many pieces of what we need in other people, in other spaces. And this is not dissimilar to what we're asking people to do in bystander behavior. And so if we don't have this, how can we have the other? But I'm skipping ahead here a little bit. So, one of the things that pro-social bystander behavior asks is, we're asking young people to be fully present in a moment, connected to themselves and the people in the situation enough to intervene, and comfortable enough in the space to handle potential conflict. So building positive associations with handling conflict and being held by others in that situation, in that space, really builds resilience against feeling disconnected and disembodied. But it is a big ask we have of young people to be in all these unfamiliar spaces, or a space that's familiar but keeps evolving because it's on a college campus, let's say. Ask them to do pro-social bystander behavior, when most of the time they may feel pretty disembodied. And as Jen mentioned, with so many young people entering college, having not had the formative experiences of high school graduation, senior cut day, all these things that were really, integral to forming in-person relationships, they did online. And so now they're entering in-person spaces and expected to have all this scaffolding for community and handling conflict that they don't have. And the flip side of this is that the response to trauma is also deeply visceral. Unfortunately, it is a deeply present, embodied experience that then the body and mind tries to immediately disassociate from. And it codes this response as safety. So your body starts coding being disembodied as a safety response, which is totally normal. And that can be freeze, it can be fawn, it can be flight, it can be, the world of neurobiology of trauma has really expanded from the 90s into multiple different ways that we react to a traumatic incident. But this is sort of at the core of what Jen and I wanted to talk about, which is that if we're asking young people to do this really hard thing, we're asking them to do it without understanding the tools that they don't have yet, that they may not have in their communities. And so this is sort of where we're going with the idea of being embodied, being connected, and what that means in your community. If we kind of do this sort of Venn diagram, there's squares, not circles, so I apologize. But embodiment and pro-social bystander behavior, you have embodiment on one side and pro-social bystander behavior on the other side, which Jen will go a little bit more into. You need these elements for both. You need to feel safe and what's available and authentic to you in the moment. You usually need to have some sort of shared identity with the person that you want to help, or the person who's experiencing harm, or the person causing harm even. There needs to be a built sense of empathy. And what was fascinating is, I don't know how many people attended Sloan Thompson's keynote yesterday on AI and the advent of AI and consent and sexual relationships in the world of AI. But, she had this incredible quote up by someone saying that this is fake empathy. What people are building with AI boyfriends and girlfriends and partners and communities is fake empathy, because empathy requires sort of the messiness of vulnerability. And that's not something you get through an AI connection. They don't actually care about you. The tech company cares about your money, but they don't care about who you are as a person. And that's what builds human empathy. And so that was fascinating to me to hear when I knew we were going to do this presentation today, just this idea of what does it mean to build real empathy? If you're asking ChatGPT how to break up with your situationship, does that help you build empathy, or does it help you build empathy to be in person and have that difficult conversation? The other elements are like, how connected do you feel to the community? How much power and access do you have in that community? How the environment shows up with your identity. So if I'm showing up as a brown woman and an artist in certain spaces that have been mostly all white men, because I have a history of working in higher ed, those have been really difficult spaces for me to feel embodied, because I don't feel supported or seen with the expertise or the skills or the philosophy that I bring. And then you do have to have knowledge. You have to have knowledge of the situation and a sense of self-assuredness. One of the things that Jen and I talked about a lot with this idea of embodiment and bystander behavior is that the strategies available to you are very narrow. This is something Jen said, which I loved. When you don't feel embodied or present, which is, something Jen touched upon with the Denver airport example. But like Jen said, at that point, it was travel considerations that were bringing her down. There are much bigger, much more intense, much more scary things that we are asking young people to do when they don't necessarily feel embodied and present in the situations where we're asking them to do those things. Embodiment requires being in community, the good, the bad, the messy of connecting with other people. And it also requires you to feel confident and accepted and supported and heard, even if they don't always agree with you. There should be a basic element of respect in feeling like I'm embodied in this community. And then the more confident and engaged a young person is, or any of us are in a situation, the more conflict secure you are. And this is another concept that I've been working a lot with lately and reading a lot about. And it's really been eye-opening to me. And it is not my term, again, credit where it's due. But before I move on, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything in the chat that I had to address, or that anything anyone wanted to share. Oh, okay, yes. The erotics of liberation handle. Perfect. I'm so glad that someone put that in the chat. Thank you so much, Leslie. Um, so what is this idea of conflict secure? Again, all credit to Care from Erotics of Liberation. I have the handle here on the slide in case anyone wants it. I read this at a moment of deep collapse for me at a time in my life where I really needed this. To be conflict secure means that conflict no longer threatens your sense of belonging, worth, or safety. It doesn't mean you enjoy it or that it's easy. It means you can stay present enough to choose curiosity over collapse and repair over retreat. And this person was mentioning this, not necessarily related to bystander intervention, but they were talking about this idea of Gen Z using chat GPT and AI and having high social anxiety to have any difficult conversations or to engage in anything that felt like it might cause conflict. There's a lot more slides to this idea that they explain in detail. But one of the things that really got me was they were saying that Gen Z seems to have all the terms in order to explain the emotions that they're experiencing, the dynamics that they're having, the traumas that they've gone through, but they don't seem to have the ability to actually engage in navigating through that experience with someone. And granted, not all experiences are safe. And what they're saying is not that everyone should just go out there and be in conflict all the time, but building conflict security also builds resilience and it builds community. You cannot just disassociate from a group that you've had a bad experience with. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, many young people, unfortunately, in the pandemic, lost out on a lot of these hard experiences or are doing them entirely online. I remember when I came home one day from school sobbing because I'd had this terrible fight with my best friend. And we had to take the night. We didn't call each other. She wasn't online. I wasn't checking her Instagram or TikTok or whatever. We actually wrote letters to each other to try and repair that. I'm not saying we need to go back to that, but what I'm saying is that the illusion of presence is not presence. And that's something Sloan Thompson talked a lot about yesterday in her keynote, which I really appreciated. So I just want to put this idea out there that being embodied gets very threatened when there's conflict. And when we're asking someone to be an active bystander in a situation of harm, that is a point of conflict that threatens many other feelings of safety for a young person. So these are just some of the thoughts that I wanted to put out there as we go into the next section of Jen sort of talking through a case study of working with athletics.
Yeah. And Mira, you're seeing a lot of affirmation in the chat about the idea of having the language, but not the skills.
Yes, I know. It's been like for me, like making this presentation, because I just feel I'm seeing Mallory's comment about feeling so seen. I felt so seen, like, because, and I also think I felt so seen because I'm an artist and because I have that negotiation constantly in another part of my life. I was like, what is it that we need to bring over here that's not connecting? Anyway, well, Jen will get more into that, but I'm excited that people are engaging with it.
And the great opportunity, right, is that when we're doing bystander intervention training, that does give us an opportunity to get people to practice the skills.
Right. But I think what Jen and I were talking about was that they practice the skills, but then they go back to their communities where they may or may not have these scaffolding of these feelings. Okay. I'm going to
go
over to Jen.
One thing we promised we would do is talk just a little bit about, right, fidelity to evidence-based program while allowing for adaptation to unique community needs and leveraging community strength. So that is to say, right, like when we think of active bystander work, and I've been trained in a couple curricula. I'm a master trainer for mentors in violence prevention. which is really good with some populations and has some limitations with groups that you're training every year who are ready for bigger and larger challenges. Back when Step Up through the NCAA and University of Arizona was one of the first programs, I worked with some of their curriculum, but I'm also trained in bringing in the bystander, which has, and bystanderism is one of my professional areas of research and practice, and that is one of the ones where I've seen the pattern of some of the most evidence-based studies on the efficacy of bringing in the bystander. And I say efficacy and not effectiveness, because efficacy is what works in really controlled environments, and effectiveness is what happens in everyday environments. And part of to make a program work, we have to think about in what ways does it need to be adapted to our environment, and in what are the core things we can't leave out. So when you hear fidelity, right? So if whatever program, and we're like, well, it's an evidence-based program, it's only evidence-based if you're keeping core components, the elements without which implementation will not have its intended effect. But the idea that we have variability in settings and populations and cultures and historical circumstances that make the generalizability, like if we over control, practitioners correctly have some pause. And this is right where you all come in, because there's always going to be a need for best processes to complement best evidence with theory, your professional judgment, and the indigenous wisdom of those who live with the health program locally, right? So part of that is, right, when I work with athletic teams, we try to meet with some of the captains in advance to say, hey, what about this? Like, what kinds of things do we need to talk about? What are the strengths of your team and talking about that? So we are collaborating with them to think about their wisdom, because they're the ones navigating that. Adaptation is, right, tailoring what we're doing to fit a new context without losing those central components, right? So you might add or customize some materials. When I present to our athletic department, when I go to another campus and present to their athletic department, I am using their athletic colors. I'm using their athletic icons. I'm using the picture of the team I'm working with, but also thinking about some of the language. I think about a fail of customization as I was working on a campus, and I didn't realize that they were 100% residential campus. So the minute I started talking about an off-campus house that your captains live in, I lost the group, because that was not that. I think about too, like working with, sometimes at McAllister, I'm working with an NCAA men's team and women's team in conjunction, like our golf teams, and doing a scenario about something happening in our fitness center where a men's team was dominating space. They were like, oh, our director of sports, our strength coach just would never let that happen. So like that was a no-go of not adapting to that environment. A narrowed or expanded primary audience, so really thinking about who you're working with. It's different when I work with lots of teams together versus one team in specific. Added activities, changes in length of order of activities. Boy, I know that best practice would say, I want a 2 or a 3 hour session with an athletic team, and I want boosters over the course of the next year. And reality is we've negotiated really well for a 90-minute session that has to address a couple other things, right? To meet NCAA standards, we need to share information about our Title IX coordinator and some other things. But also, right, recognizing we also shift focus to other behaviors. Our active bystander work, since it's the one time we get to do it, isn't just about sexual respect. It layers things that relate to it, but also call on them to be active bystanders, right? Mental health, substance use, which often has some interesting intersections with sexual disrespect in those pieces. So we're going to move on to a case study in athletics. I like to joke, as someone with a master's degree in public health, if I don't show the socio-ecological model every single time I present, they take away my degree. But that is to say, right, like in public health, like this is how we like to think. And there's other areas too, right? Brofenbrenner, who came up with the ecological model, really well quoted in Student Affairs. But the idea, right, that things that are happening on our campuses happen at an individual level, interpersonal, family, friends, faculty, mentors, supervisors, teammates, roommates, clinicians, group, teams, organizations, classes, classrooms, residence halls, our campus, our policies, our built environment, our values, our norms, our academic calendar, and then societal, local, state, national, international context, and the state of education. Going back to what Mira was talking about earlier about CARE's philosophy, right? Thinking about relationability and not just individual. We can't solve community level problems at an individual level. And when we're doing active bystander work, it lets us spend time in an interpersonal space and sometimes a group space. And then as we talked about, right, like a campus approach, some of that is how are we thinking about our campus environments to also be more supportive of this. In talking about, seeing sort of that COVID generation, what I saw in my work with athletics is we had the year where we sent students home early after spring break in March. And then they were living on campus, but were remote for classes, and we had very limited like groups and organizations and athletic practices over the course of that year. And I recognize how much learning didn't happen because students weren't navigating the everyday being in together spaces in the locker room, in the dining hall, and traveling together. So when we talk about athletics, I think it's an opportunity to talk about what are some of the protective factors for student athletes. I think a lot of times folks in athletic spaces are braced for us coming in and telling them why they are at higher risk of perpetration. And I will also say they may or may not be at higher risk of perpetration. We know sexual violence is one of the most underreported harms that happens. And sometimes people are more able to correctly identify something as violating consent if the person who did the thing looks like our narratives about who does that. I used to work on a campus and there was a saying that hipsters don't rape. And my immediate reaction was, wow, does that protect the hipsters who do? So thinking about that, but leaning into the protective factors, there's a potential for positive team norms, right? Norms can go either way. There can be some not great norms, or there could be positive team norms, and surfacing those so they're not just implicit. How do we make those positive norms explicit? Shared values. Every time I go into work with the team, I ask them what their team values are, and there's a lot of accountability, family, sometimes love. Our football team, love is their first value. So we can connect this work to values they're already talking about in other contexts. Accountability, right? They are used to holding each other accountable. One of my favorite examples I give is if you're working with the baseball team, and you talk about, right, if the pitcher hits the batter with a ball, sometimes that batter, their first instinct is to rush the mound and run at the pitcher. We hope what their teammates do is go and hold their batter back, right? And they're not saying their batter's a bad guy. They are saying in that moment, because they were not hit with a baseball, their judgment is clearer than their teammate. And then making that explicit connection when your teammate is drunk and in someone's space and doing something that you think might not be okay. You're not saying they're a bad guy. You're saying in this moment, my judgment might be clearer. So really making that accountability they're used to explicit, looking out for each other, both to protect each other from harm, but also to protect each other from harming someone else. We try to start with an expectation that nobody wants to have sex with someone who doesn't want to have sex with them, right? And try to establish that as a norm. Training expectations, varsity athletics, because the NCAA has some expectations each year about training, and some athletic departments do it online and that kind of stuff. I'm fortunate to have worked at campuses where the AD thinks it's important enough to make it an expectation for the coaches that they give us time to do this in person. It is leadership training, right? So we have leadership with students and staff. Athletics is so interesting. I'm partnered with someone who teaches in college theater. We see it happen here too, where they socialize together, right? Like a chemistry class might not all socialize together outside of their chemistry class, but an athletic team will, a theater group will, some organizations will. So the training we do that's part of their co-curricular now extends to hopefully what they use in their extracurricular, and thinking about it's an interesting space because first years and seniors are hanging out together and you have that age disparity, but also that disparity in social capital. Athletes are trained all the time for situational awareness. Where are your teammates on the field? Who needs help? Who's got it under control? And embodiment. What we do is embodiment. Mira talked a little bit earlier about shared identities, right? Literally, if you look at this picture, they're all wearing the same clothes. That is an outward signifier of a shared identity. So again, thinking about with athletics, even if they have some of these tools, making it explicit to thinking about using these in other contexts. And speaking of context, context matters. I just want to name, right, my work and my active bystander training. I'm working with NCAA Division III schools. Those are students who are not on athletic scholarships. Often on a campus, you might have more access to an athletic department if they're Division III. Division I sometimes is more siloed from the rest of campus, might not have as much of a shared identity with the rest of campus. So I just want to say that can be harder depending how you're situated. We have 21 varsity sports here at Macalester. We have some array of club sports, so we do training for all 21 varsity sports. We do active bystander workshops every year with primary club sports, those club sports that have a roster that travel together in that. It's really hard to do it with our Nordic Ski Club because they just have a random assortment of people showing up on Thursdays to get in a van to go cross-country ski. But one of the really important things Mira noted earlier was the idea of empathy. And I always think about when I walk into a space where I'm going to facilitate, whether it's a team on my campus who I know well, or it's a group on another campus I don't know well, is to start from a place of empathy of what is it like to be 18 to 22 navigating conflict with your teammates when maybe you haven't had a lot of practice. What does it look like when anytime someone has been in the role and come in front of you before, if they've treated you like all potential perpetrators? So starting from a place of empathy and also thinking about my own embodiment. When I present to student athletes, I'm never sitting. I'm always standing because that is the energy that they are used to. I'm so fortunate. Our athletic director keeps me in really good swag. So I wear my athletic swag when I present to athletics, right? Because that is about creating a sense of shared identity. So even thinking about my own presence, I try to put my phone someplace where I can't see the notifications, again, to keep me mentally present and in the space with them. But one of the things I want us to consider, right, is I always share in an active bystander session that identity and context always influence what feels available and safer to someone as a strategy. The example I give our students that maybe some of you can relate to is, I'm a staff member at our college. If I walked into a student space and a student said something that was homophobic, not only do I have a lot of permission to address that, but they actually probably expect me to because of my positional authority. If I go to a board of trustees meeting and one of our trustees says something that's homophobic, my identity hasn't changed, but my options have changed, right? I might not feel empowered to address that as directly. I might have to think about who is the best resource I can talk to who has some equal power to that trustee? Do I know another trustee? Can I talk to our provost? So giving that example, the way our students are embodied, I absolutely influence what feels available to them. So sometimes, right, when we think about, and it's why a lot we use the language of interrupting a behavior, checking in on a behavior to help folks understand it doesn't need to be conversational. But sometimes when I work with NCAA women's teams, and they're like, oh, if we're out at a club or if we're out at, a party and someone's dancing up on our teammate and it seems they don't like it, we just dance in kind of an amoeba and surround our teammate and dance them away, right? Because they're used to an embodiment with each other that feels like something they can go to. It's also really interesting, we might think of like, oh, our larger male identified athletes have all the options open to them. And I think about like 15 years ago when I was newer to this work and I was working with our football team at Grinnell College, and I'm like, this is going well. And at the very last minute of the session, one of the football players said, Jen, this is well and good, and I understand what you're asking us to do, but I'm never walking a drunk woman home by myself because she might feel threatened by me, and people are going to look at me like I'm a predator and taking advantage of her. So we had to back up and say, who else could you get to help? And the answer is a female embodied person would make that situation feel safer, probably for everybody. So just helping them recognize, right? Like the reason we use active bystander to diversify a toolbox is because of identity and context are always going to affect what feels available to us. And that's why there's not one right answer. Another way we think about embodiment is to think about spaces where our student athletes feel embodied. And that is a locker room. And often I start with a scenario related to a locker room. So they might have a scenario about it's the first week of preseason practice. You notice the first year on the team never showers in the locker room or even changes in the space. I will tell you a huge change in COVID is before COVID, I would say about 10% of our folks on NCAA women's teams showered with their high schooler club teams. About 75% of our NCAA men's team members did. And post-COVID, not post-COVID, post the intense part of COVID, it's almost none of folks who are on our women's teams and like less than 25% of our men's teams. So now they're coming and there's a new norm that they've never experienced before. But in the scenario, they usually hurry out right after practice and you worry they're missing on team time. Or, and I'll talk in a minute, sometimes we actually have students devise their own scenario. And I came to this because if I write a really specific scenario about like the crappy thing you're doing to each other in their locker room, that feels like judgment that I assume you do this crappy thing to each other in their locker room. And when I open it up, they can name things that might make someone uncomfortable in their locker room that would rise to the level of needing an active bystander. And they come up with really interesting things that I had not thought about, right? So it's interesting to hear our men's teams talk about discomfort of disrobing in front of each other, or if you're in the corner lockers, like you can see here, and you're changing, you are sometimes touching your teammate while you're both naked, and people have different levels of comfort at that. Thinking about when someone is using their phone in the locker room, what is the feelings of safety or not safety with everyone else about whether or not you're taking a picture? That is something that was not part of the conversation 30 years ago when I was a student athlete. And people talked about, right, like what if there's body image challenges? What if this is our teammate who is trans? What if there's someone who has a surgical scar, like any number of things, right, where they would talk about it. But this is bringing them to their own embodiment as we're thinking about bystanderism in a place where they're expecting or feeling that. So in the debrief, right, we ask some questions. And one of them is why might someone feel uncomfortable in your locker room? And you can put in the chat if there's other examples where you think someone might feel uncomfortable, what kinds of things those would be. And then the other thing I ask them is how do their teammates learn about norms and expectations for your locker room? And that's the point where I do like the raise your hand poll of like, did you shower with your teammates in high school? And it is so easy for our juniors and seniors to forget what it was like to be a new first year and not know. Swim teams, right? A lot of times in high school, they'll shower together, but with their suits on, and they come to college and everyone's taking off their suits. We know a core part of being trauma informed and consent is you have to know what you're consenting to. And so we surface, how do your new teammates know what they're consenting to? And these are the people on your team with the least social capital. When they come in after practice and everyone's taking off their own clothes and they didn't know that was going to happen, we're actually not giving them the opportunity to consent to that. And that could be really valuable. I always ask them, why are we discussing a scenario about locker rooms in a workshop about sexual respect? And I will get a variety of answers of, it is a space where we're vulnerable. It's a space where we're naked, right? And that has us think about everyday consent and sexual respect. And the other thing I want them to get to is this is a space that they have a lot of control over, right? For our students at McAllister, we're in a city. If they go to a dance club, they have control over themselves and the group that they're with about their norms of coming and leaving and if they're going to stay close to each other, but they don't have a lot of control over the space. In a locker room, that team has a lot of control over what are the norms in that space. And that lets us then talk about other spaces. And then specifically talking about power dynamics in a team locker room space. We also do some work, student athletes. I mean, as much as we get good stuff done sitting and discussing, they want to do. So I've moved to a lot of times I'm giving them a scenario for them to fill in the details and then for them to act out. It would be a whole different hour session to say, how do we have some guardrails so they're not acting out something that's not going to be trauma informed or harm others in their room. But you can see, like in this top one, you can really tell they are doing that. There's people drunk at a party and someone has gotten in their car to drive. You can actually see the scenario happening, right? But this actually lets them practice some of their active bystander skills, not in a theoretical, but what does it feel like to step up to someone? What does it feel like to grab someone's pretend keys? What does it feel like to do X? Um, I love it. You can see in the bottom left, not everyone wants to like do a lot of the acting practicing part, but you can see we're actually talking about locker rooms in that lower left one. And those two people are being the showers. And I love it, right? Because they found a role and they're like, I will be the shower. And you can see right on the lower right, like that's someone, right? And they're doing a heightened version of conflict. And the other two people are the bystanders who are about to notice and actually physically walk in between the two people having conflict and maybe each talk to one. So it's a way for them, right? And it's not like it might be the lowest bar to do embodied work like this with student athletes, but when we talk about how do we get them to practice the skills, this is a way to get people embodied and present and practicing the skills. Not a single person in this room is multitasking in any of these photos.
The other reason I know we're at our 9 minute mark, but the other reason I do love this is that like even if they're going to laugh at it and giggle and maybe not feel like this is a real representation, they're kind of forced to present to people who they live, work, and play with how they
Yes.
might be in a situation.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming there's no substance use in these scenarios, so that definitely alters it. But making people do things, of course. Now, there's also a conversation about ability and able-bodiedness here, but I think seeing your people do something that you wouldn't necessarily even want to acknowledge in another space just shows you a different side of them, which can be really revealing and helpful. And at the very like basic element of it, it's more information. The more information you have going into a space, the more you can figure out what strategies work for you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mira. And I want to show you something that I think of kind of like as that 2.0 level, because we want to think about what it's like to be an active bystander. But when we're in a group, we can also talk about what it means to be on the receiving end of being an active bystander. The most brilliant example I ever heard of this, and I wish I remembered who said it at a conference 10 years ago, because I would love to attribute it them. They talked about working with a fraternity. And in that fraternity, they agree in the sober light of day, if one of your fraternity brothers hands you a solo cup of water, you are done drinking for the night. You've overconsumed. We're worried about you. You're not going to drink any more alcohol. And I love it because they're agreeing to what it means to be an active bystander when it's not the heat of the moment. But look how subtle that is. No one other than the person handing the beer and being handed the beer knows that it's actually a solo cup of water. So I just think that's great strategic planning in advance. I do this, right? Like we have poll everywhere, and I use this as a discussion prompt. So let's say we've done a scenario, and again, we don't go into specific details. We try not to do an escalated trauma harm scenario, but a situation where maybe someone's not sexually respecting someone. We talk about, right, like Mira was talking before, how do we develop positive associations with handling conflict? So I'll ask them to anonymously pull in, right? If you were in a situation where it seemed like someone was not sexually respecting you, would you want a teammate to check in? And they're allowed to answer anonymously, right? Because now they can be honest without that threat to their sense of belonging. But then, right, when they answer this, we can say, hey, I'm not asking anyone to tell us why they said yes, unsure, or sometimes no, but why would someone be unsure? What would make someone unsure? Why would someone say yes? Why might someone say no? But then we ask, what do you want this to look like? When someone checks in on you from our team, how do you want that to look? And that's what helps us think about moments of conflict that doesn't threaten the sense of belonging, because they are coming to a shared agreement of what this looks like. A lot of people are unsure, are really relieved that it doesn't mean, oh, my teammate's coming over and being like, unhand them and making a big deal out of it. Then it might mean, oh, my teammate's going to come over and say, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. Do you know where it is? Or do you want to come with me? Right? When we know identity determines if that's available to you, because female identified people tend to go to the bathroom together and male identified people don't. The second one, right, is we think about is the second question there is, if my teammates thought I was sexually disrespecting someone else, would I want them to step in? So now we have changed it. It's not something happening to you. You might be potentially harming someone else. Do you want your teammates to step in? And then we ask them, why would someone say yes? Why would someone say no? And talk about that with the shared values, but then also ask, what do you want that to look like? Our students are so creative in all of the ways they think about that. Just like they have signs on the field, some of our teams have signs of like, dude, like you need to back off, right? That's a subtle hand signal that they've agreed upon in advance. It could be that that's when I'm going up and I'm saying, hey, let's go get tacos, right? Whatever that is. But to say, to practice that in a head, and that is in that moment, we're choosing curiosity about what that looks like, which helps them be more conflict secure. And they're agreeing about what it might look like in this moment, which again, we hope is lowering the level of the threat to their sense of belonging. We know first years might feel less empowered, and this is where it's really important, right? I'm not giving them the answers, I'm prompting with questions. I want to hear the captains and seniors in the room say, hey, if you're worried about stepping in, come let me know and I will go and step in, right? But for them to say that. So if these factors inspire intervention, we think about how do we create the scaffolding for connection to grow. So again, right, like these are some good tools in thinking about how we work with student athletes, but we all work with all kinds of groups, right? Some of this might feel applicable to our work if you work with fraternities and sororities or student organizations, but thinking about how do we connect those shared values to this work? How do we take other ways that they practice accountability into this work? How do we create a community of care, shared expectations, right? Invested leadership of students and staff, how we're living, working, and playing together, situational awareness, and I love this, right? Situational confidence, right? So the practice helps them be a little more confident, practice some words so that if they're in a situation, they might be more confident, and then thinking about the embodiment piece.
Thanks, Jen. I know we kind of like rush through this and we don't have too much time, but we do want to leave you with some thoughts. This is a quote from another community consultant and speaker. There is an accent on the E, so I believe it's Nikkei Aurea, and their handle is there on this. I loved this, that they said the truth is community costs something, whether it's inconvenience, discomfort, or honesty. And the benefits of community are endless: support, care, accountability, belonging, resilience. But we're not meant to carry everything alone. And community reminds us that we're not alone and we don't have to be. And so one of the things that I feel is really important here is like, okay, we all don't work with athletics teams, correct? But we need to create more opportunities as prevention educators in the work to actively build community or help our young people build community so that we can expect them to be active bystanders in a community that they're invested in. One of the things that I'd love to leave you all with is this. I don't know how many people listen to the podcast or watch Trevor Noah's podcast, What Now? But he was recently on with Carter Sherman, who wrote a book about Gen Z and this sort of sex recession. And one of the things I wanted to leave you with was the fact that being embodied really means being vulnerable, having more conviction, having difficult conversations, increasing comfort with giving and receiving feedback, and feeling held by your communities so that your actions can align with your values. And I'm going to sort of show you or play for you this short video. And it just was really fascinating for me.
But, like when I came across your work, it was around, there were all these headlines about the sex recession. That's what got me intrigued, because I'd be reading the news and then all of a sudden I'd see a headline, sex recession. I was like, what is this? And you click into it and it was like, Gen Z are not having sex. They're having less sex than ever before. The sex is going down. No sex for Gen Z. What does that mean for your children? And you'd see all these headlines. And you really, in truly one of the most brilliant ways, you break down what people are missing. Is that it's not a sex recession because like kids are like, oh, no sex, or I don't want sex, or you go into the nuanced ideas in and around sex, intimacy, the responsibility, the bonds that people have. Yeah. What do you think people miss when they just go, Gen Z doesn't want to have sex?
I think we take the idea of sex as being like good in and of itself. For whatever reason, even though there's so much shaming around sex, it's like treated as a bad thing, a knee-jerk bad thing that the sex recession is going on.
Yeah.
And I think we should be asking ourselves, like, why does it matter if young people aren't having sex? Because, like, to be honest, I don't really care if young people are having sex or not. Like, what I care about is whether or not they are willing to be vulnerable, whether or not they learn skills like how to risk rejection and how to handle rejection and what it means to connect with other people, not just sexually, but platonically and romantically. And so, like, the reason I find all these headlines about the sex recession to be very interesting is because I think we don't actually interrogate what sex is or means or the role that it plays in our lives.
So I just wanted to play that for you all because for us, it was really interesting to think about not just the sex recession, but the idea that young people are not being they're not being given enough opportunities to create connection and vulnerability and empathy and intimacy and difficulty and become more conflict secure. And you need all of that to be an active bystander. You need all of that to care enough to do something in person. And we'll just leave you with this final quote by Esso. This is their handle. Community doesn't just magically appear. It actually takes work. It takes time and attention. It takes risking rejection. It takes showing up. It takes reaching out, even when it's not easy. You nurture it before and after there's a bond. Community is not found, it's formed. And I know we went 2 minutes over and I've apologized for that. But we just kind of wanted to wrap it up with this idea of we need to create more opportunities for community for our young people if we're expecting them to build empathy and expecting them to check in on each other and expecting them to create more safety. And I hadn't mentioned this, Jen, but there was a great...
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just know that Juliet needs this link for the next session right now. And so I'm so sorry. What you've been saying is beautiful. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yes. No,
Thank
don't
you,
worry.
everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you,
we'll
Mira.
see you. Bye.